My daughter-in-law announced their 5-day trip to Bali, complete with business-class flights, was already paid for. An hour later, my emergency savings account showed a balance of negative $47,000. I sat alone in the sterile silence of my kitchen, hands wrapped around a porcelain mug my late husband Michael had given me on our last anniversary. I kept wondering at what point my love for them had become a license to take. I thought it was just about the money, but what I discovered next would unravel everything. My morning began as it always had for the last 30 years. 2-level scoops of dark roast coffee, a slow, deliberate pour of water heated to precisely 198 degrees Fahrenheit. Old habits, ingrained from a career in federal aviation, die hard. The discipline, the timing, the procedural calm, it sticks to you, like the faint, persistent scent of jet fuel on a jacket you were sure you'd washed clean. I hadn't set foot in a cockpit for over a decade, but my life still moved to the precise rhythm of takeoffs and landings. My condo in Rosemont overlooked the sprawling runways of O'Hare. From my kitchen window, I could watch the silver bodies of jets lining up, slicing through the flat gray Midwestern sky. There was a profound comfort in their predictability. They followed the rules, respected the lines that kept everyone safe. I once believed people operated on the same principles. That morning held no specific plans, just a few emails to review for the Women's Aviation Mentorship group I volunteered with, and perhaps a walk if the biting Chicago wind let up. It was a day designed for quiet until I opened Instagram. Chloe had posted again. A beautifully arranged photo of a room service breakfast, golden pastries, exotic fruit, and espresso in delicate white cups. The caption was a glowing tribute, thanking the woman who was her daily inspiration. She tagged my name, Eleanor Vance. For a fleeting moment, it might have felt like love, but the image was too perfect, too staged. It felt less like a genuine sentiment and more like a performance for an unseen audience. Still, I let it pass. It's what mothers do, isn't it? We let things pass, even when they settle in our gut with a dissonant hum. I left my phone on the counter and went to the pantry to make a grocery list. Rolled oats, almonds, basmati rice. Simple necessities. As I reached for a pen, I heard Chloe's voice from the living room. She and my son Liam were on a speakerphone call. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the condo was small, and her tone was bright and unfiltered. "The Bali resort and the business-class flights are all booked and paid for," she said, her voice bubbling with excitement. "We leave in 4 days." Then she laughed, a sound that was sharp instead of joyful. I mean, with her history in aviation, she won't mind. She's used to people flying away. It was a joke. I knew it was meant to be a joke, but it landed like a stone in my chest, not after everything I had done for them. A quiet, pressing knot formed beneath my ribs, not anger, not even sadness, but a heavy, inexplicable weight. I walked back to the kitchen, took a sip of my now cold coffee, and stared at my phone. My name sat beneath her post, a monument of hollow praise. In that moment, something inside me shifted. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I could feel a certain ascent, like the irreversible moment a plane lifts from the tarmac. There is no going back, only forward. If you've ever had someone treat your kindness like a blank check, you'll understand what I did next. And if you haven't, you might want to hear the rest of this. I didn't confront her, not yet. My first instinct was to create order. I wiped down the already spotless stovetop, realigned the spice jars, and reset the kettle. Then I opened my laptop, not for emails, but for the bank. I navigated to the secondary account, the one designated for emergencies. The page loaded with agonizing slowness, or perhaps it was my own breath that had stalled. The balance appeared in stark red numbers. 47,218 yuan. There had been no alert, no warning. just a void where security should have been. I froze, not from shock, but from something colder, a systems failure deep within me. I clicked through the transaction history. The most recent charge was from a luxury travel agency. This wasn't just a flight, it was an all-inclusive 5-night stay in a private villa in Bali, plus international business class airfare during peak season, booked under Liam's name, paid for with my routing number. The room tilted, not with rage, but with a sudden, sickening clarity. They had access. That was the first truth I had to swallow. Liam had helped me set up this very account after Michael passed away. I hadn't hesitated when he suggested linking his name as a secondary user, just in case I ever needed help. At the time, it felt like a gesture of love, of protection. Now, it felt like a trap I had willingly helped build. I closed the laptop slowly. What disturbed me more? The missing money, or the fact that I couldn't remember the last time my own son had looked me in the eye without a flicker of evasion. From the living room, Chloe was still on the phone, laughing about brand aesthetics and the visual story arc of their family journey. I stepped onto the small balcony. The air was cold and smelled of ozone. The endless line of planes taxied and lifted in a seamless, controlled ballet. Out there, surrounded by the white noise of turbine engines, my thoughts began to settle. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel humiliated. I just felt hollow. They hadn't asked. They hadn't explained. They had simply taken. And worse, they had wrapped the theft in the language of gratitude, in hashtags and curated smiles, framing it as a gift I had given them. I gripped the cold metal railing. The signs had been there, hadn't they? The way Liam deflected questions about his freelance work, the way Chloe insisted on tagging me in family photos I wasn't even in. I had mistaken it all for clumsy affection. This wasn't a mistake. This was a calculation. I went back inside, sliding the glass door shut. Chloe was off the phone now, smiling at me as if the world hadn't just fractured. "Want some tea, Eleanor?" she asked. I nodded mutely. As she turned toward the kitchen, my voice came out, low and steady. "No, not yet." I sat at the table and picked up the mug Michael had given me. It had a hairline crack near the base from when I'd dropped it years ago, but I could never bring myself to throw it away. I ran my thumb over the gilded rim. This was never just about a vacation. It was about a boundary they had crossed without a backward glance. And now that I had seen it, I could never unsee it. Whatever came next would not be gentle, but it would be necessary. I waited until the condo was empty. Chloe had a recording session for her wellness podcast, and Liam went with her to manage the equipment. They left around 2, her cloying perfume lingering in the air like a promise that couldn't be trusted. The silence that followed their departure was different. It wasn't peaceful. It was sharp, surgical. It was the silence of a hangar after the mechanics have gone home, when you can finally hear the hum of your own thoughts. I opened the bottom drawer of the bookshelf and pulled out the small, fireproof box I hadn't touched in years. Inside, everything was as I had left it. The old USB drive Liam had configured for my backups, the original routing documents for the emergency fund, and a file folder marked with Michael's initials. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking for a record. That account wasn't a slush fund. It was the product of decades of careful saving. Bonuses I'd set aside, travel stipends I'd never used, the small life insurance payout after Michael's death. It was meant to be my silent safety net. And now, it had been systematically drained. I powered up my old laptop, the one Liam always joked I should retire. It booted slowly, the screen flickering. I logged into the private folder and opened the PDFs of the bank agreements. Liam's name was right there, listed as a secondary signer. He was the one who had submitted the digital signature forms for me all those years ago. At the time, I saw a helpful son caring for his grieving mother. I clicked into the activity log. The transaction for the Bali trip wasn't made through the standard online portal. It was pushed through using an internal authorization method, one that bypassed the usual security alerts. It wasn't a function a normal customer could access, but someone who worked in systems integration or someone who had spent countless hours watching their mother work on FAA security protocols late at night could have learned it. My hands didn't shake. I didn't gasp. But I felt something in my spine lock into place, a cold steel bar of certainty. I was no longer guessing. I knew. He hadn't just taken the money. He had manipulated the very system he had helped me build. I opened a spiral-bound notebook and began to write. I documented every transaction, every date, every confirmation code. I wrote down the name of the travel agency, and beneath it all, I wrote a single sentence. He knew exactly what he was doing. I returned the files to the box and slid it back into the drawer. I didn't slam it. I didn't cry. I made myself a cup of tea, the water at 198 degrees, steeped for exactly 2 minutes. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about the invisible line between love and trust. Once it's been crossed, there's no going back. 3 days later, they left for Bali. Chloe wheeled out 2 matching aluminum suitcases, dressed in a linen jumpsuit as if she'd stepped directly out of a resort catalog. Liam carried the camera bag, his gaze fixed on the floor as he gave me a brief, awkward hug. I stood in the doorway and watched their rideshare pull away, a glossy itinerary their only farewell. Once they were gone, I walked straight to the second bedroom, the one they used as a makeshift office and wardrobe overflow. Behind a stack of blankets in the closet sat a black, fireproof briefcase. I carried it to the kitchen. Inside was the original folder of financial documents Liam had so helpfully organized for me years ago. Now, every page felt like a contract signed under false pretenses. One envelope stood out, labeled with my full name and social security number. Inside was a financial access agreement I didn't remember signing. The signature looked like mine, but it was a digital scan. I knew because the tail of the E in Eleanor was slightly curved, a habit I'd corrected years ago. I set the document aside. Next, I opened my email. I was looking for backup. There was only one person I trusted implicitly. Sarah, a former junior manager from my division, who now worked in compliance for a private aviation firm. We hadn't spoken in months, but she was precise, discreet, and direct. I wrote a short, emotionless message asking if she had time for a coffee to discuss a potential breach of digital authorization protocols. She replied within the hour. Saturday morning, a cafe in the city. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I logged into the old FAA compliance portal, which I still had access to as a retired consultant. The framework Liam had used to move the money was disturbingly similar to a system vulnerability we had patched back in 2008. I remembered him, still a teenager, sitting beside me in my home office, watching with fascination as I wrote the security memo. He had weaponized the very knowledge I taught him to use for protection. I logged out and pulled out a legal pad. At the top of the page, I wrote 2 words: document everything. There was no panic left in me, only motion, and this time it belonged entirely to me. Sarah arrived 5 minutes early, choosing a corner table far from the weekend chatter. She slid the envelope I brought across the table and opened it without a word, her eyes scanning each page. Her first words were quiet and final. This was deliberate. She tapped the authorization form. A sequence code embedded in the file showed it had been submitted remotely and verified through a system Liam would have been familiar with from his own work. He knew exactly what would pass undetected. She flipped to the transfer logs. The timestamps were all between 2:00 and 4:00 a.m., spaced out over 3 weeks. He hadn't taken it in one lump sum. He had chipped away at it, just under the threshold that would trigger an automatic alert. "What do you want to do?" she asked when she was finished. I told her I wasn't interested in suing, not yet. I needed everything verified, reviewed through official channels. If a confrontation was coming, it would stand on a foundation of facts, not emotion. We worked for the next hour, cross-referencing bank logs with the timestamps on Chloe's Instagram posts, matching travel dates with Liam's authorization codes. Before she left, Sarah gave me a new set of instructions, a secure messaging app, and the name of a legal advisor specializing in elder financial abuse. It was strange to be seen as a case study, but it was also the first time in months I felt truly seen. That night, back in my silent condo, I reread every file. Sometime around midnight, I wrote a single sentence at the bottom of my legal pad. He learned all of this from me. Now I will teach him something else. They returned late on a Wednesday, voices light and tinged with the manufactured ease of a vacation they hadn't earned. I stayed in my room, observing. They unpacked in the living room, Chloe talking about the humidity and the infinity pool. I heard Liam mumble something about jet lag. Then Chloe asked if I'd checked the mail for a confirmation from their villa photo shoot. Liam reminded her to transfer the final payment. She laughed and said she'd already used the shared card. I wrote the time in my notebook. 9:41 p.m. The next morning, I went to a print shop and made 3 copies of the folders Sarah and I had assembled. One for me, one for Sarah, and one sealed in a manila envelope. I left it on the desk in their office. No note. At 7:28 that evening, the condo grew heavy with a loaded silence. He had found it. He didn't knock. He just stood in the hallway, his face not angry, but pale and diminished. I walked past him to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and told him I'd be transferring the lease on the condo. I had found another place, smaller, closer to the lake. He would need to make his own plans. When he still said nothing, I continued. I told him I had spoken to legal counsel, that there were digital logs and financial records proving unauthorized access. I hadn't filed formal charges yet, I said, but I would if anything else went missing. Then I looked directly at him and said his name once. Calm, steady. Liam. It didn't matter if he apologized. The damage wasn't just done, it was documented. I walked back to my room and closed the door, leaving him standing in the hall, clutching the envelope as if it were radioactive. That night, for the first time in months, Chloe didn't post a thing. The apartment was finally still, not peaceful, not yet, but honest, and sometimes that is where healing has to begin. The days that followed were strange. Liam was quiet, withdrawn from both me and Chloe. She tried to maintain her facade, posting old travel photos and videos about emotional alignment, but her energy felt forced. I heard them arguing one afternoon, her voice sharp with questions about a sponsor payment that hadn't cleared. His response was a muffled silence that settled into the walls. That evening, I finalized the lease on the small apartment by the lake. When I returned, Liam was sitting at the table, the documents from the folder spread out before him. He didn't look up. "Do you hate me?" he asked. I said nothing. The question didn't deserve an answer. I walked past him and went to my room. Later that night, I heard him packing. The next morning, a note on the counter said he'd gone to stay with a friend. 2 days before I was scheduled to move, Chloe knocked on my door. She said Liam had told her everything, or as she corrected herself, enough. She admitted she knew the money flowed too easily, but had let herself believe it was support I had freely offered. Then she told me they had received a hefty advance from a brand partnership for the Bali trip, paid directly into their joint account. She offered it to me, as if money could patch the chasm that had opened between us. I stood up and told her gently that this was no longer about reimbursement. It wasn't even about forgiveness. It was about peace. And I was finally reclaiming mine. The morning I left, I placed an envelope on the kitchen counter. Inside was the key and a note with a single line. No passwords, no access, no return. I locked the door one last time and walked away, my hands empty and my head finally still. My new apartment welcomed me with quiet. I unpacked slowly, arranging my life into a space that was entirely my own. A week later, Sarah visited, bringing a report she'd compiled. Every transaction, every breach, was officially documented. At the bottom was a note: prepared for legal submission, pending your direction. I placed it in a drawer, not as a threat, but as a safeguard. She also told me something unexpected. Liam had quietly attempted to reverse 2 of the transfers. The bank's fraud protection had blocked him, but the attempt was logged. He was unraveling, not in a storm of rage, but in the quiet, shameful way that happens when consequences arrive without an audience. That night, I wrote a letter I never planned to send. I told Liam I loved the boy he used to be, but I didn't know the man he had become. I signed it with my full name, not Mom. I placed it in the drawer with the report. There was no vengeance in my heart, only a clarity that felt like the rarest form of peace. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived in his handwriting. He wrote that he finally understood why I walked away. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was just acknowledging the truth. I spent the next few months finding a new rhythm. I joined a local skills-sharing group for seniors, helping others navigate the confusing digital world of finances and insurance. I spoke about what it meant to love someone who crossed a line, and about learning to say no without apology. After one session, a woman told me, "You kept your dignity. That's no small thing." That night, walking home under a clear, cold sky, I felt the truth of her words. I hadn't just survived a betrayal. I had come through it. Not broken, not bitter, just awake. The woman in the mirror was no longer a victim. She was someone who had finally stopped giving herself away. The apartment was warm when I returned. I made tea and sat by the window, looking out at the lake where the ice had begun to thaw at the edges. It wasn't spring yet, but it was close. And that, I thought, is enough for now. If this story speaks to something quiet in your heart, know you are not alone. Sometimes healing doesn't arrive with a dramatic finale, but in the stillness of choosing yourself after years of being overlooked. Dignity isn't about pride. It's about remembering your own worth, even when those you love forget it. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is quietly close a door and walk toward a life that is truly your own.